Welcome, everyone. This is E2KG. This is our deep dive. This is 11, our 11th episode. Good 11. So, if you remember that from your Schoolhouse Rock days, congratulations. And we'll keep coming back because we're going to talk about a little bit of this at the end of the show and tomorrow as well. But, for the E2KG network, we're never too happy to have big numbers. So we like to keep coming back around, keep things fresh, keep things changing. So stick around to the end of the episode where we'll talk about a little bit of some of the changes coming your way on the E2KG network, especially for the core show here, our gaming podcast. We've got a lot of other good shows on the network, many of them coming up this week. But tonight we are going to enjoy our final deep dive with my good friends and co-hosts, Swiss. Hello, how are you, Swiss Guard?
I'm doing well. You made me think. I wonder if Prime is ever on the Prime numbered episodes. Because now I'm starting to, but I don't have the ambition to go back through and cross-reference that. So
I'm surprised that for all the restarts and reboots that we've had, that we haven't actually talked about that in any type of way. So, but that sometimes happens. You know what? But Prime is not here tonight, so we can talk about him all we want. But he is celebrating his Bears win and standing on top of the NFC North in a chaotic football season that it is. But we've got a lot of other chaotic news to talk about. We've got some sad news to talk about at the beginning of the show with Telltale Games Studios. And then we'll go into a series of announcements related to some Sony announcements last week as we head into TGS. We've got some good news there. And as we talked about and teased last week on Deep Dive, we've got the Nintendo online service, which is now live and launched. And for all its beauty and its warts, we've got plenty of things to talk about. But it is not just Swissguard and myself. We have the one, the only, the man, the merchandise, Agasically Stamos. How are you, sir?
I'm good. Very happy to be back. I think, was I away last week? I don't even remember. A lot of things have happened. So
you were away last week. We soldiered on without you, but we're glad to have you back. I know, right? See, so this is good. And show what I would like you to show the viewers the wonderful shirt that you're sporting here on the E2KG network. That is excellent. So enough small talk, gentlemen. I want to, you know me. I'm always happy to ramble on plenty of times, but I want to slow the pace down a little bit and talk about the news coming out on last Friday related to Telltale Games Studio. So as the news broke, it first started as rumors and then became more and more confirmed, and we've got some more details about it today. But first, it started as a studio closure, then it became massive layoffs, and what it amounts to is that it is almost a complete layoff. They are over 90% layoff of staff. They are down to about 25 staff. They have those staff are around to finish the Minecraft story mode game for Netflix, but the rest of the projects have been shuttered and canceled. The Wolf Among Us Season 2 has been canceled. The Stranger Things game from Netflix has been canceled from Telltale, but now Netflix has come out and issued a statement saying that they are shopping it around and looking to continue to bring the story in an interactive fashion. And we also have some what I think is kind of, you know, emotional, maybe sad news related to what is Telltale's kind of biggest franchise, which has been The Walking Dead. They were in the middle of their final season, and actually today was the release of the second of 4 episodes. And there are some stories out there. There's a really nice letter penned by the voice actress of Clementine that this second episode will be it's going to end without a finale. So this will be the final one that was being released, that there is not another one. There's not the final 2 ones coming. So this is, this happens a lot of time in TV, right? That we have series that are canceled before their story arc hits a run. We don't necessarily have a whole lot of information about the cause of this, right? We know that Telltale has had some accusations, some documentation around a relatively toxic work environment, a lot of mandatory overtime and harsh working conditions. They've had a CEO or CFO changeover in the last year, kind of some arguments in terms of corporate direction of which way and where their revenue models would be. But we don't necessarily have any financial information, at least that I've seen, that explains kind of how they got to this kind of crisis point. Agasicles, as you and I have talked about financials on many of E2KG shows, have you seen anything out there that kind of peels back the layers of how they got to this point?
No, and to be quite honest, I just haven't had the time to dive into researching this. It's been kind of interesting from my perspective, and I was very fortunate. I was very happy to listen to some Friday afternoon podcasts. Particularly the guys over at Kind of Funny, and hear their state of confusion, as I was equally confused as I saw the multiplicitous, duplicitous, and often conflicting headlines that were dropping all throughout the weekend. In a lot of ways, from a news cycle observation standpoint, it felt very much like when the iPhone 4 was discovered, and there were all these conflicting reports, going into a weekend on was it real, was it not real. And in a lot of ways, it felt. I mean, it's sad to say, but it, at the time, we were experiencing the byproduct of some hurricane weather reaching landfall, and this story was almost poignantly timed to concur with those experiences. You had, again, like all these conflicting stories of which one was it, which one was it not. And we dropped in our chat that it was closure, and then the next headline that I saw was massive layoff, which to me is different, right? Closure means you're done, you're gone, pencils down, everybody's gone, there is no payroll. So even 25 employees being left is different than a studio closing down. So, but no, I haven't seen anything directly. As you would imagine, I have tons of speculation though.
You know what? It helps when I'm not muted. So let's go ahead and let's get into some of that speculation. Unless, Swissguard, have you seen anything a little more hard and fast in terms of some details?
The one detail that jumped out to me was just the foolish way that I think it was handled by management. Like, because so there's 25 people left. Doesn't mean that they had an excuse to. What the reports are saying is that they basically, hey, everybody, you're let go. The studio's severely contracting, and then there was no severance, and your benefits run out at the end of the month. So, we're all family men. That would be, it'd be devastating for my family if I wasn't able to find a job really quickly. We'd survive, but I've been through. I've worked at a big corporation, and that has reduced staff, like kind of mandated at a corporate level. You have to reduce engineering staff by X percentage, right? And it stunk, but they were open about it, and they gave people the opportunity to leave voluntarily and take a package. And then when they didn't get enough of those people, they're like, okay, on this date, it's going to happen. So people were able to get the ball rolling on a plan. And even then, so yeah, you're going to lower morale, but you're also, I think people can accept the fact that you're respecting them enough to say, look, we're not going to be able to continue. You need to do what's best for you. And a lot of us did. I was on a particular project that allowed me to last longer than others. But ultimately that was going to run out, and I ended up getting a job and was able to seamlessly transition. So that's life sometimes. I don't understand why you let people work like this anecdote was like, I was working until 3 a.m. the night before, and then I come in and then they lock me out of my Google Work account, like when I'm in the meeting. So it just was very, to me, like cruel, unnecessary, needlessly so. You know, you gotta have some responsibility for your employees.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And there's been some stories out there that have talked about that, right? Like today employees had 3 hours to come back in to grab their personal effects, right? That this was not even a full day. This was not any type of by the end of the week, right? Even what's the most recent closure that we had, right? We had Gazillion, the Marvel Heroes online game. That closed, right? That they at least gave employees a week to get out of there and kind of start that process. It doesn't necessarily mean that, I guess if we think about the Viscera one from last year as well, that there was not a whole lot of forewarning coming there either. But for a studio that's had that documentation of incredibly long hours and poor working conditions, that has not shown respect to their employees, that their wages have not been as competitive, and to now be out and be close to the end of the month where your benefits are running out, yeah, I think it's a really challenging spot that they're in, and I feel I feel bad for all the developers, the designers, the artists, all the narrative story people that have created a lot of good content through Telltale that are now kind of hopefully find new homes to land. So Agasicles, you've got some speculation here, and I am really curious because the more that I keep digging into the story, the more questions that I have. Right, like you talked about the layoffs versus closure. Right, there is California law out there related to that severance packages have to be tied in with a certain amount of time frame for mass layoffs. But since this is being defined as a business closure rather than a layoff, that 60-day notice for mass layoffs is not required under California law. So there's a lot of kind of, as you said, Swiss, a lot of questionable corporate practices here. So let's talk a little bit about maybe some of what those are, but also some of your thoughts related to it. So as you've been reading the news stories, Agasicles, where do you seem to be kind of what's been drawn to you?
Yeah, I guess a couple things that I first want to do is kind of, I don't want to say set the story straight, but just maybe give some additional context, right? So, and not because of you guys, but we've used the term corporate a couple times, and I guess unless I'm just completely missing the bar, as far as I understand, the studio was about 200 to 300 people at most. It was 225 or so that were recently laid off in the big layoff. Is that accurate?
Yes, I think that seems to be accurate about my numbers. Yeah, and I guess I would agree with you that corporate as a generic term, not necessarily as there is because Telltale was a relatively independent studio, correct?
Yeah, I mean, as far as I know, I mean, I guess, and I've been meaning to dig into this. I mean, my assumption has been that their publishing arrangement was with each of the companies whose IP they were doing. So I assume 2K published the Borderlands Telltale game and Tales from the Borderlands, and that Warner Brothers Games published the Batman games. So it's a small business, right? And Swiss and I both worked at the same company that had the series of layoffs, and our business unit where those layoffs were occurring was 4 times the size of Telltale Games. So there's something to be said about, and then we had corporate oversight, right? We had a whole huge HR department that was probably the size of our whole business unit. So there's something to be said about a maturity of process and resources to manage those things. Not to say by any means that means that these guys handled that situation well. They absolutely did not. But that's kind of a thing that you, as an employee, have to have some concerns about when you go to work for those companies, right? I have deliberately chosen to only be employed by companies of a certain size, right? Because when you go to work for small businesses, this is the kind of process and maturity and people and maturity that you hit. And another thing, now this is an issue that I do want to set the story straight on. There's a lot of reports I see in the media that are attributing the toxic environment to the closure of the studio, and I don't know that I would agree with that line being drawn in terms of causality, right? Your company goes out of business because you stop cycling money in the manner in which it needs to be cycled, right? Somewhere there was, more money being spent, or not. What I suspect more so is not sufficient money being earned for the work that was being done and the number of employees that were employed. I feel, as we start to get into the speculation with those two things being said, I feel like what we're seeing is much more a 38 studios situation, and really more specifically, what has been springing to my mind predominantly has been Harmonix. And I think for me, more than anything, what I feel like this lesson is drawing, and the thing that's being surfaced from this, is that I think the games industry has gotten very good about settling in to release cycles and concurrent fiscal cycles that are pinwheeled to annual releases, right? The sports game genre has been we're the first ones who were able to establish that. First-person shooters have been able to slide into that paradigm. There are some racing game franchises that are doing it, and to be quite honest, I don't know how Codemasters is running a financial cycle that allows them to put out a Formula One game every year. I'm like, are enough people buying that Formula One game? That's an expensive game, right, with the physics engine. By the same token, that's on the left side of the business cycle. I think the industry has also gotten very good, and it's kind of weird to say, has gotten very good about supporting the "it's done when it's done" business cycle, right? So the rock stars and the Irrational Games before they closed down with what's the game?
BioShock.
Yes, with BioShock. There are games of that ilk. BioWare with some of its IP, with Dragon's Age and some other things. These weird things that are in the middle, I think, are the things that are problematic. And I think, as Harmonix did, there was an effort to push Harmonix to release something annually for a game genre and a subgenre that really didn't support it, and that drove them out of business essentially. And I feel like the way in which Telltale Games was saturating the market with their specific type of game, this hyper-specific thing that they were doing, and combined with those all being licensed IPs and not much of, I don't think, any of their original work, I feel like is what drove them out of business.
I think that was one of the things I had heard. Sorry, DB. That was one of the things I had read that I thought was an excellent point, was the licensing. Because, I don't know, I'm ignorant. I don't know how licensing works for things. But apparently there's a lot of money that you have to pay up front to whatever company you're licensing from. And as you make the money by sales, you pay $1 million to whoever up front, you keep making your money. Once your sales exceed that $1 million where you have to start owing them again, you'll start paying them more. But whether or not your game flops or not, you still have to pay the franchise money for the IP. So, and everything that seems like Telltale was doing, like most of what Telltale was doing, was leveraging name recognition for major IPs, Guardians of the Galaxy, Walking Dead, Batman. So they didn't have, the upfront, some upfront cost was there's probably higher overhead in the development than you would have otherwise thought. So,
yeah, I mean, I think here's a key question that I'd like to take a pulse on to get an indicator of how many of those games did either of you ever actually pay for?
I have never bought a Telltale game.
Right, I've never paid a dime for a Telltale game, because all of them eventually wind up free on PlayStation Plus or Xbox Games with Gold. Like I've gotten them free so many times, similar to the Assassin's Creed series. The difference is, with the Assassin's Creed franchise, as individual gems came along, I would pay for those up front because I wanted to pay them upon release. But Telltale Games, for me, were always just a game that you just waited on to show up for free. I was like, there was no need for me to expend my opportunity cost in making that like my payday game, that I bought, every 2 weeks.
So I know that Osiris Prime and myself have both purchased some Telltale packages throughout the years, but you're right. Like a lot of those have trickled their way through the free cycle. I want to come back to that point of licenses, and I think you're both are really spot on there. I think that is a key issue here, and there's been stories out where how poorly both Batman games have sold. That the second Batman was the worst selling of all their Telltale most recent franchises. I think your point about them leveraging the license is really problematic. And this is not something that something I've thought for sure, but also something I've read plenty of times over the last 4 years of Telltale's kind of rapid expansion is really, they're competing with themselves in terms of nobody else was making a Telltale type of game. And the more that they put out there, they were really just kind of cannibalizing their own market. And this is where, how many times can you play that same type of choose your own adventure story aspect that Telltale provides? And I think that's definitely been part of the problem. The licensing part of the problem also makes me think of the Game Biz article that I read today about kind of the potential of licensing and season pass money, right? Like as you said, Swiss, that money comes upfront you're paying it upfront from the licensee, but then if you're buying a season pass, that money comes early in the season of whether that's a 4-game or a 5-game cycle. And potentially, if you're managing that well, that money is used for the investment and support of those resources and staff members developing that game over the rest of the time. But if it's not, if you think that the good times are going to keep lasting, that money can suddenly be used to go out and buy another license or to invest someplace else. And this is where this is exactly what Telltale ran into in the last 2 years, is that you had multiple games being developed at the same time. That they went from being a 1-game studio back with Sam & Max and Puzzle Agent, and who else, right? Bone. They had a lot of kind of smaller LucasArts types of adventures to their big blow up with The Walking Dead. And then suddenly you've got Game of Thrones happening at the same time as Batman, as the same time as Borderlands, as the same time as Minecraft. And that, that there's a lot of things that were going on in a very short period of time where, to me, it seems like that's the causation, not the toxic studio environment, right? Like I think the toxic studio environment becomes a warning shot for other developers of, chances are there's more going on if this is the type of. It's disappointing to see that there's the potential of people trying to draw a causation there when really it is only kind of a flavor text for what the environment of Telltale must have been.
Yeah, and it's poor market assessment too, right? So in my mind, I think there was a mistaken strategic vector where there was the thought that gamers who were playing these games were playing them because of the IP. I don't know that that's the case, right? I don't know that big fans of first-person shooter Borderlands flocked to Tales from the Borderlands when it came out. Sure, some of them did, but what you were really dealing with, and what they needed to size, was they needed to estimate the size of the point-and-click adventure game market, right? Not the, oh my gosh, Game of Thrones is so popular, so that's what we need to, that's why we're going to go after that. I think one thing that's that I would use this as a cautionary tale for the people who are chasing the battle royale thing, right? Because again, I don't know that the industry has figured out how to make battle royale games annualized. There's certainly not a we'll work on it until it's done model. So where is that soft spot in between that you have to figure out? Fortnite has figured out how to craft an emergent kind of ecosystem out of their game, but I think that can only be farmed for so long, as well. I guess. Well, sorry. Go ahead. You guys go ahead with your comments.
No, I was just gonna say I think the battle royale comparison is somewhat apt, right? I mean that in some ways there's more studios out there competing for it versus in Telltale's case where it really was there weren't that many studios doing that. But I think last week we saw that Lawbreakers finally shut down, right? The Boss Key Productions there that battle Realm Royale from Hi-Rez, Hi-Rez of Paladins and Smite. They had broken up into 3 studios within their company, and that they've slashed the staff of their Realm Royale because it's a razor thin margin for some of those. The idea of chasing after, those trends.
The one other thing I would add, and the thing that I would fear, and you started to take us down that path, is one of the fearful lessons learned that people might extract from this who are in the industry are, this is what happens to games that don't have microtransactions, right? Because I think we've drawn this line before on a recent conversation we have, right? But these are games that didn't have a recurring revenue model underneath them. And I know a lot of people are looking at them and saying, this is why we don't make story-driven games. This is why we don't make single-player experiences. This is why you have to do some type of microtransactions and keep getting people to pay. I think listening to another podcast earlier this week or late last week, what I heard was that EA in particular, and I'm sure every other big publisher, maybe other than Ubisoft, that their metric is that they want people to pay for their games 3 times, right? So for a $60 game that you buy, what they're trying to do is build out a model that gets you to pay $180 for that game over its lifetime of ownership.
Yeah, I think that's a whole nother topic, and maybe that's a good topic for the next deep dive. But I think you're right. It'll be interesting to see what people take away from this. What lessons do they take away from it? Was it because of the cannibalization of their own markets? Is it the financial irresponsibility of the licensee properties? Is it the toxic studio environment lends itself to other mismanagement issues, or the fact that the revenue model of a one-shot story-driven game that ends up getting given away on your subscription services isn't necessarily a great model for bringing in and turning a profit. So lots of choices here in terms of what the takeaway is, but hopefully, I think one of the takeaways that will end up happening is that the talented people working at these studios, the creative people who have put a lot of these properties in some really interesting stories and push the narrative areas within gameplay storytelling, I hope that they find other avenues to land at and to continue to find creative outlets. So I want to transition us because you brought up a good point of reading the market, Agasicles, and I want to move us into some other stories of the week, which I think read the market very well, maybe a little too late to the party. But so Sony last week announced a couple of big announcements that fall right in line with some other market trends. So we've got the announcement of the PlayStation Classic, and we've got another announcement related to PlayStation Now allowing people to download and play their games versus just simply stream them online. And so, right, we've seen this in the market before. We've got the NES Classic, the SNES Classic. We've got the Neo Geo that just came out. There's a lot of classic consoles. We've still got a Commodore coming out, a Commodore 64 Classic coming out at some point in time. So that the classic kind of standalone micro console, single box and you're done model is definitely been a proven revenue strategy for Nintendo. And then the PlayStation Now, which has one of the one-upsmanship that Microsoft's Game Pass had over it was the ability to download your games so that you're not dealing with input lag and other issues. And now PlayStation Now is moving into that as well. So, gentlemen, we got a couple of different avenues to take this. Anybody want to take a bite on their I guess, please, I know how much you love micro consoles that only do one thing. So, is Is this a good business announcement, but not that exciting as a gamer announcement, or is this a trip down nostalgia lane for some people?
Well, I guess the first thing again that I would jump on is so. Excuse me. I would characterize the NES Classic and Super NES Classic as successful sales models, not necessarily successful revenue generating models, right? Because you and I have both talked and done quarterly financials and like looked at the financials, and I'm like, this is just noise to Nintendo as far as what they earn. And I don't think it really does anything great for like the engineering staff of the company. Because as I've mentioned, like who would want to be the engineer who gets tagged to go work on the NES Classic, right? That would be embarrassing. There's no glory there. And again, like just like we talked, this is the conversation we had. Now, when I go back to what we just said about Telltale, this is a console with no recurring revenue model underneath it because you're not buying games for it. It doesn't have games with microtransactions. It goes out and it's just an inert piece of plastic sitting in somebody's home. So therefore, I don't even understand this, right, for Sony, who's making even more money off of PlayStation 4 sales, why you do a classic that is, again, going to be even more noise or less noise. It's gonna be even less of ripples on a lake, right, as far as a pebble being skipped across than it is for Nintendo. So I don't even get why you do this. I would say the other thing I would say is you mentioned that the only trick that Games Pass had over PlayStation Now was the download. I guess I would contend that don't they also have they're doing day and date release for first party titles, which I don't think PlayStation is doing.
You caught me oversimplifying for the sake of discussion. Man. Devil's advocate, here we come. Okay, so yes, I think that you're absolutely right that the micro console model, especially for Nintendo, was much more about mind share and market share in terms of brand awareness than it was about revenue generation. And I would argue that is going to end up being a similar strategy. It's the first thing I thought of for this, is that this is a similar strategy. This is a bridge for PlayStation, right? We already know that the PlayStation 5 is not coming until 2020, right? We get this. PlayStation can put a new box on a shelf and continue to build brand awareness and loyalty this year, and they can still stick out a PlayStation 1 or excuse me, a PS1, right? The later redesigned model of the original PlayStation, the more sleek, rounded version of it, a PS1 with DualShock controllers next year, before they get into 2020, where they actually have a new machine to sell us. So I think it becomes a shelf space and something that keeps the PlayStation logo in front of people and gives fans something new to purchase. So
I
Swiss
think
is
that's the key. It's the new shiny. I mean, I admit that I got caught up in some of that with Nintendo and my fanboyism. And then when you actually get it, you're like, oh, wow, games have advanced in the last 25 years. You know what I mean? So the thing that I kind of found the most interesting is, well, kind of tying in another story that you referenced was Nintendo Online. It launched, of course, and with Nintendo, of course, they didn't reveal details until towards the end. But I think a while back they had hinted at like some sort of classic game service, and finally we got some information on it in the run-up. But hey, if you subscribe to Nintendo Online, you have access to, I think, 20 or so original NES games. They have not ruled out Super NES coming down the pike. They haven't announced anything. But that's going to expand. So now you have, like Agascli said, the plastic box sitting in somebody's house. But you also have those same games available on the Switch, but they're also tied to an annual revenue model. And it's not the only reason why people would buy Nintendo Online, but at least it's a perk tied to some sort of recurring revenue stream. And it's going to be a lot easier to play than the plastic box. So one, just for actual stock reasons, and two, you get the actual benefit of the portability of the Switch. So I feel like that's kind of a better way to go. But the zeitgeist is little box. Like when I saw that there's a Commodore 64 Mini, I can't even, like, I don't know.
So I think that's a nice. You did an excellent job. Thank you, Swiss, of segueing and tying those transitions all together. Right, you've woven a beautiful tapestry of our topics for the second half of this show. It is, I think, a really good question of, is the box, other than nostalgia, and maybe that's enough, right? The SNES Classic certainly has done that. The Nintendo, I'm guilty of it as well. I own an NES Classic, and part of that is because it's a reminder of my childhood, and every 6 months it's great to pop out for a weekend. But really, it's a plastic box that sits connected to one of my HDMI ports that I probably should be better using with something else. And that's a really good comparison of the Switch services for $20 a year, or $35 for a family plan. So if you've got multiple Switch accounts or users connected to a console or multiple consoles, you can do a family plan that does allow you to get the 20 games. And it looks like, at least for the first 3 months, they're going to be adding they're going to be adding 3 additional games each month. And those games do have multiplayer. They've got online modes. They've got some other additional features built into them. There's some plus features that they haven't announced yet. So it seems like there's a little more value added than just simply, here's a plastic shell and an emulator, and it makes you feel like you did back 24 years ago when the PlayStation originally launched. So Gasicles, I think finally the rest of the podcast is coming along to your side of, these plastic boxes are nice and they tug at the heartstrings, but they're really kind of pointless.
Yeah, I kind of don't get it, right? They don't generate revenue. They've got a maintenance tail, right? Because there are things that you have to warranty and that people can send back. I mean, I completely get the zeitgeist play, right? And I completely agreed with it when Nintendo was in that zone where they had yet to release the Switch, or they were about to release the Switch. And then even with the Super NES, where you had you had supply scarcity of the Nintendo Switch, and you were like, we need to get something in these people's hands that says Nintendo on it, so that they hold on until we can get the supply chain filled up. PlayStation doesn't have that problem, so I don't get it. I don't get why maybe you do this next year when you really do need to bridge from the PlayStation 4 to PlayStation 5. I guess one thing I was going to ask you guys, is this an incubation play? Is this a thing where, but I mean, PlayStation 4s are so cheap, but still, I guess I would say, is this what you get, your tween ager, before, a couple of years before you're going to buy them a PlayStation 5 because it's cheap and it's less expensive and you don't want to give them a PlayStation 4 yet?
I mean, you can get a PS3 for fairly cheap, and there's a huge library of cheap games. You go to GameStop or any mom and pop game store, you can get a lot of good content for cheap. I mean, I guess this is kind of more of a neat and tidy box, but going to why would you get this for somebody? One thing that works for the Super NES is that it's well done as far as like 16-bit art, right? I mean, even today, indie studios are still doing like 16-bit sprite-based games. Nobody's doing the nasty polygon early, like era 3D modeling. Like, when's the last time you guys actually turned on Final Fantasy VII and looked at those models? I mean, it's horrid. And it's the technology at the time, but I always felt like, there's an artistic level to Super Mario World and Legend and Zelda. I think Zelda, and Super Metroid that you don't really get on a Gen 1 PlayStation. So as a product in that sense, I don't even think it's that good.
Yeah, I'll take that bait, right? I think even without the Nintendo fanboy poster behind me, that right, I can look at Genesis art and appreciate that the sound there. I think that there's, but again, there is the potential of some really beautiful art, like Castlevania Symphony of the Night. That's excellent soundtrack, beautiful sprite work. But again, that's kind of the oddity on the original PlayStation. You're right. There's not a whole lot. We have not hit that retro nostalgia place where indie games are mimicking the tank controls of Resident Evil 1 for the sake of feel good old timiness.
Right.
I do wonder, back to Agasicles' point about who buys this, is I think that this ends up being in a similar spot to, other than the fanboys who are going to buy it because it's the new shiny. I think what it does is it catches people who are lapsed gamers from a generation that is maybe not us, of a generation that is one below us. It is the lapsed gamers that remember the PlayStation, that fell away from it when things got more complicated, or that life got more complicated, and that this becomes an avenue to bring them back to the PlayStation. And I bet, or at least as a business designer, if I'm in a retail space, I'm sticking these right next to the PlayStation Slim $200 version of it during the holiday sales, because somebody who's coming back to look for this, and even if the supply is limited, that they see for $100 more, they can buy what is the current console that still has the same brand that they remember. I think that may be the bridge to that. If I'm pitching this as a business decision, that's my business model there.
See, what I'm building is I'm going back and creating the horror, or correcting the horror of the PlayStation Vita. Right, I'm looking at the Nintendo Switch and I'm going, people really dig that portability thing. We used to have that mojo. We used to have that magic back when we had the PlayStation Portable. Let's get back to that. And this time, let's make it less expensive than a smartphone, right? It doesn't need to be jazzed out with the super high-end tech, because anybody who needs something that high-end is just going to do it on their smartphone or buy like a Razer phone. So let's get something that's, runs an LCD technology, because that'll be cheaper than an AMOLED display. There's tons of there's tons of like last year's processor. I mean, the Nintendo Switch is running the NVIDIA Shield technology from 2 or 3 years ago, right? Just grab Qualcomm's leftover Snapdragon 835s that were in last year's flagship phones, slap those on a PlayStation Portable, put dual analog sticks on it, put your PlayStation 1 library on it, right? But make it where people can download it, and then just keep creeping that library forward so that you can play, PlayStation 2 games on it and PlayStation 3 games on it. You're done. Voila. Right? Putting it in a fixed console, like, I don't understand that so much, and I don't think they need the bridge just yet. But fine, it's a thing. I know people are going to buy it.
I think, well, you guys have already, disproven the myth that $100 console is a revenue generator, but it's probably quite cheap. A little flash memory and some plastic, and you're good to go. But yeah, I didn't even think about that. But I'd love to have that's the thing about Sony. They kind of do follow. They'll see what's successful, and then they follow along. When the Wii came out, that's when we ended up getting the PS Move, right? And it's just, they don't always implement it the best, but they recognize something that works. And I would think that that'd be more appealing to me as a gamer. But I think DB's right. It's not, you're not the target demographic, unfortunately.
See, I love the pitch of making this a portable console, especially in the same week when we have the announcement from Sony that they are stopping not only production but distribution and support for the PlayStation Vita as well. So not only are they not taking advantage of the business opportunity that Agasicles is laying out before them, is that they are cutting off their their existing chain of that portability as well, right? I think that there's a lot of reasons why I sure love my Vita, but there's a lot of reasons why there is a market out there, as the Switch has shown, for some type of portability. But whether or not there's a palette for that within Sony, who has always been much more concerned about pushing the tech forward rather than moving a platform forward, right? Like Nintendo has always been about reusing something cheap all the way back to the Game Boy, right? Like they're really the ones who are going to grab a Snapdragon and throw something on there, where Sony has been about hardware over market share, sometimes to their own detriment. So, gentlemen, we got some good Sony stories here. Any final thoughts related to any Sony announcements? PlayStation Now, we haven't really talked about that. To make you a little more interested to give it a try now that you can download something, or again, is this thinking about holiday sales? Does PlayStation Now, does a year subscription to PlayStation Now with a PS Slim bundle for $200 become a nice entry point for somebody because you can download it just like Game Pass is now? Or is this still just kind of a technology for a casual audience versus a collector?
I like that. I mean, like you said, like if you kind of market this properly and as a holiday bundle with the Netflixification of the American and Western and I guess Japanese, the world psyche at this point, I guess it could be a good play. I'm just happy that they're recognizing the fact that not everybody has excellent broadband internet, as is evidenced by my pixely complexion right now in the live stream. No, not everybody can stream everything all the time and have it be an exciting experience. So there's that positive aspect.
All right. Well, I'm going to take that as our positive note to end the evening on. So, we started off with some disappointing news about Telltale and some realities of where they were at financially and within their business. But we've got some good, or at least some interesting news coming out of Sony. And I'm sure as we roll into this next month here, as we got a lot of game releases, we got Tokyo Game Show, still some announcements there. We've got a little more about Red Dead Redemption 2 online coming. So there's lots more news for us to continue to churn through. And here on the E2KG network, we will definitely be doing that, but we're going to be doing it in a little different capacity coming into October. We're going to be contracting down our gaming show output to stick to one show a week. We're still going to be coming at you with some deep dives. We're still going to be coming at you with some topical discussion in terms of our own gaming experiences and how that ties into gaming trends and some thoughtful reflection on our own backlog and our current games. But we've got a lot of other shows coming out of the E2KG network. We want to make sure that there is space for all of these to find an audience, for them to have time in the spotlight as we continue to think about allowing the diverse voices at E2KG to have a platform to share their passions and their hobbies. So that's my pitch, to stick around on the E2KG network, not only for the Enough to Keep Going show, but for a lot of the other shows. And I'm going to turn it back over to you, Agasicles, if you've got a little more details there, or at least some other shows you want to plug, because I know that you're heading off to some right now.
Yeah, so we'll be on shortly here as soon as we get off of this show, probably about 10 minutes after, for our comic book podcast. That just got started last week. We'll be doing the second episode. I will be joined by Steven, who will now be my co-host on that show. You talked about the games show. And then starting up shortly within the next couple of weeks, Dave Pecci and I will be back to cover the second season of The Gifted on It's Another Thing, our entertainment-focused podcast covering short season format TV shows. So, and the It's Another Thing movies crew I think we'll be on this week covering our second movie. We're doing a rewatch of Scott Pilgrim versus the World as it makes its appearance on Netflix this month. So stay tuned. Lots of stuff happening.
Lots of great stuff here on the E2KG network. So thank you all for your continued support and your viewership, the feedback that you've left along the way through our E2KG journey. And so we hope you'll continue with us and continue to engage with us. So for myself, DBQ Hams, for Agasicles Stamus, and for Swiss Guard, I want to thank you all for joining us for this discussion. And until next time, we will always continue to be enough to keep you going. Have a good night.